What's up, everybody? My name is Jordan Sather. Welcome to my YouTube channel, Destroying the Illusion. We're bringing back the good old-fashioned chalkboard for this one. And in this session, we're going to be taking a deep dive into Project Looking Glass. So with Q mentioning Project Looking Glass in a drop just a few days ago, wow, huge. Holy disclosure, Batman, truly. I've been waiting for Q to get into this spectrum of disclosure, into the weird stuff for a while, and they're definitely doing it with Project Looking Glass right here. This is probably one of the most obscure underground topics that Q has mentioned in a while, if not ever. So I'm very excited for it. And with that being said, try to keep your mind as open as you can, especially during this whole Great Awakening. The more open you can keep your mind, the quicker this awakening will come, and the easier it will come. Plus, if you keep your mind closed, you're going to be missing all of this hidden knowledge that they've been hiding from us for hundreds, if not thousands of years, and you won't appreciate nor understand the potentials of where this hidden knowledge could take us as a society. All right, so you don't want to miss that. Keep your mind as open as you can. I know this whole awakening process, it's triggering a lot of people. It's triggering their belief systems. It's bringing up all this cognitive dissonance within them, and that's naturally going to happen when we have all the brainwashing and mind control that we have in our society these days. But the more we can open our minds, the more we can see this self-actualizing information and then try to get it out there to make our society where it could truly go, where it could have gone for a long time if they didn't hide this stuff from us, but where we could truly go, which will be mind-blowing. You know, as Q says, it's going to be bigger than we can imagine. And I can barely even try to imagine it, right? But I know it's going to be good. So getting into Project Looking Glass here, I'm going to outline for you quickly how I'm going to go through this pretty in-depth information. And then I have a quick disclaimer for the skeptics and the fact-checkers out there. So I'm going to tell you what Project Looking Glass is in short, in summary. Okay, just give you a few sentences. And then I'm going to share with you some truth in plain sight examples. So as we very well know, our social engineers, they love to put the truth in plain sight in their media productions. And they've definitely put some Project Looking Glass-esque concepts and ideas in a lot of movies of theirs. So by remembering these movies, seeing them, you can think, oh, and you can connect with the ideas. So that's why I like to do it. Then I'll take a look at the history of Project Looking Glass. What happened in the early 1900s that led up to Project Looking Glass and very similar black projects being ran in the 1970s and 80s. I'm going to quickly go through sort of some relearning when it comes to time. Time itself is incredibly misunderstood as a society, so I'll do my best to sort of explain it to you as I understand it. And then at the end, we're going to analyze the current situation that we have between the Deep State and the Alliance. So of course the Deep State has been utilizing Project Looking Glass-esque technologies, incredible technologies for decades, but now the Alliance, the White Hats, Q, looks like they're getting access, gaining control of the black projects and the incredible technologies that are out there and using them against the Deep State. So we'll sort of analyze that scenario, all right? And then that disclaimer. So I'm not going to spend all the time in the world name dropping 1,000 people and sourcing where I'm getting every little claim from, okay? I don't need to do that to validate myself or prove myself or whatever the case. Plus, it would take me for freaking ever. What I'm going to do is in the notable links in the description below this video, you will see a bunch of articles and videos and PDFs that I'm going to find that you can do your own continuing education with, that you can research these concepts, come to your own understanding, verify what I'm saying, etc., etc. All right, so that's that. I'm just going to give it to you how I see it, how I've researched it, the conversations, you know, I've had that I've learned from. It's just my perspective, folks. Not just this video, every single video I give you, every single thing I say, and not just me, but every talking head pundit out there. It's just a perspective. All right, so discern properly. Now, what is Project Looking Glass? Let's get into it here. Project Looking Glass is a project that was done by the military-industrial complex, by groups within the intelligence agencies, and also corporate contractors. You know, when you talk black projects, it's never just one organization. It's always groups and individuals from multiple, but it was basically military-industrial complex was doing experiments back in the 1970s and 80s using reverse-engineered extraterrestrial technologies. Yes, I said it. No, I kid you not. They're using reverse-engineered extraterrestrial technologies to remote view probable futures. When it comes to Project Looking Glass specifically, it wasn't a time travel device, but it was more so allowing a psychically trained individual to view potential timelines or potential futures. And the reverse engineered extraterrestrial technology that they were using came from a crashed and retrieved UFO, extraterrestrial craft. They found a crash, they were able to get some bits and pieces of it that still worked. Apparently they found a chair that was still working, and this chair acted as a psychic amplifier. So the person's mental capacity, their psychic powers were greatly amplified by this chair. There was also a navigation cube, apparently, that was found with these UFO crashes that worked alongside that chair. So the chair essentially boosted somebody's psychic powers, and then they were able to use their mind to pilot a spacecraft faster than the speed of light using that particular navigational cube. Now, that's a lot I just told you, I know, and we're going to deconstruct every single little piece of it. Now, before we do that though, what are some truth in plain sight movies that are out there that can help you sort of connect with these concepts or ideas and show you that I'm not just crazy, you know, these ideas are out there, and the elite, they just love to toy with us, don't they? They love to toy with us and put the truth in plain sight in their production. So a few movies that have had this sort of technology, concepts, ideas in them. Number one, Total Recall. Arnold Schwarzenegger in 1990, Total Recall. He's got a psychic chair that sends him on some, you know, consciousness excursion right there. And that was only a few years after. I think that movie came out, yeah, only like a few years after Project Looking Glass and the Montauk Project were done too. We've got The Matrix, another movie where they're hooked into a chair and they're sent off into this consciousness realm or this astral realm, right? Now in The Matrix, they had to be physically plugged into the chair, and that's of course not the case these days. It's these psychic chairs or these sorts of technologies, consciousness-assisted technologies, they work with just electromagnetism, waveforms. So luckily, you don't have to plug anything into your head or get a chip. Minority Report, I think that one came out in 2000 with Tom Cruise. Holy crap, like right there. They've got the three psychics that sit in the chairs with the things up to their temples, trying to you know, connect in with their pineal glands, and they're suspended in water as well. We'll also talk about why water is important with the Project Looking Glass device itself. But anyway, psychics right there, and they're trying to remote view potentially what's going to happen in the future that Tom Cruise then has to go, you know, try to avert. And then Contact. This movie is probably the biggest one when it comes to Project Looking Glass in plain sight is Contact, because the device itself, the device that was shown in Contact, you had the rings, the concentric rings basically that all spun around each other, and this device was supposed to create this electromagnetic bubble, this electromagnetic shielding that they of course dropped Jodie Foster through, and then she traveled through space and time, basically her consciousness traveled really, and she went off into these other realms. So, wow, there's a lot, and there's a lot more. You know, Stargate SG-1 is another one, lots of disclosure in that show, but they basically have this like ring transporter in the show that they teleport with, but that's almost like how, you know, very loose depictions, very exaggerated of course, they Hollywood these films out, but generalities, incredible right there for us. So now let's get into the history of Project Looking Glass itself, and we're going to start discussing some big picture concepts of the early 1900s. So in the early 1900s, you have to understand when it comes to true history, true science. I'm not talking about the history we get in our history books or the science we get in our mainstream science books, but I'm talking about what's hidden from us, reality, right? The history, what was really going on in the early 1900s is that the deep state, the world elite, I'm talking both sides of the ocean, the deep state that was in America and the deep state that infiltrated Nazi Germany, much more so over there though. But the worldwide secret societies were on the hunt for as much true science as they could possibly find in the early 1900s. That could have been how to control gravity, anti-gravity, or electrogravitic technologies. That could have been anything giving them the upper hand on understanding consciousness, how the mind operates, how to influence time. All these sorts of things are sort of connected anyway. So they were just on the hunt for it, man. I mean, we know that Nikola Tesla's papers ended up as part of the FBI. And fun fact, if you can figure out whose uncle took Nikola Tesla's papers and examined them on behalf of the FBI. That's a story for another time, though. They took Tesla's papers. There were all sorts of UFO crashes. There was Roswell. Roswell wasn't the only one. There was also, allegedly, very likely, a couple of crashed UFO craft that happened over Long Beach Harbor at the Battle of LA incident that happened in 1942. I believe the Army got a downed craft and the Navy was able to pick up a downed craft from that incident as well. Incredible incident. Go research the Battle of LA. But anyway, multiple crash retrievals happened in the 1940s, possibly others that we haven't heard about. There was Tesla's papers. There were, the Nazis over there in Germany were getting all sorts of technologies from Victor Schauberger and the, the Vril Secret Society and various other ways. So all this got sucked up into the deep state's hands, and we haven't heard much about it. But of course, if they get, say, any sort of downed UFO crash or figure out anything about an ancient ruin that's giving them an understanding of some incredible technology, they're going to try to use it for themselves. Of course, the deep state, they want as much power and control as they can. So if they're going to get any sort of crash retrieval, they're going to take all the bits and pieces out of it that they can use and reverse engineer it. And that's exactly what they were doing. So one of the UFO crashes that they got, it said it's the Roswell crash. Like I said, could have been a different one because there's been multiple. They were able to get a chair from the craft that was essentially a psychic amplifying chair, much like those chairs I was describing in the, it's depicted in the media films. It was a psychic amplifying chair. And the individual would sit in it, being a human or, in this case, an extraterrestrial being piloting their UFO. They would sit in this psychic amplifying chair, and that's how they would pilot their craft. I mean, we're not talking about rocket propulsion here, folks. That's what's been sold to us in the mainstream in regards to space travel for decades, and there's a reason for that. It's because they're trying to hide all of these secrets, all this stuff. And when it comes to this sort of tech, going faster than the speed of light, you have to navigate in not only 3 dimensions of space, but a dimension of time that we're going to discuss. And that's how they pilot it with their freaking mind. They meditate on the point in space and time that they want to go to. The chair, of course, amplifies their abilities to do so. A portal or a Stargate or a wormhole or an Einstein-Rosen bridge, whatever you want to call it, opens up and the craft goes through it. All right, I know it sounds nuts, but there's stuff out there to corroborate this. So that's how the beings were flying their craft. The deep state were trying to reverse engineer this. Like, how the heck did this psychic amplifier work? And not just that, but there was a navigational component involved as well. But the navigational component that helped them navigate space and time to fly faster than the speed of light or travel faster than the speed of light really wasn't involved in Project Looking Glass. Project Looking Glass was simply temporal viewing, not temporal travel. But we'll touch on the travel part of it here in a little bit. So that's how they got the technology. Let's get into now Project Looking Glass in the 70s and 80s. So Project Looking Glass was alleged to mainly have taken place at the S-Force facility near Area 51 in Nevada. S4, all right? And it goes to be said here, a project that was very similar to Project Looking Glass, doing experiments in time, most likely in my head that they were connected in some way, involved with each other. They happened near the same time and involved in the same experiments. But anyway, the Montauk Project in New York. And many more people are familiar with the Montauk Project because they've seen Stranger Things, You know, there's another truth in plain sight right there. Stranger Things, wow. You've got this psychic chick that is using her abilities to basically astral project herself into this different realm where space and time are different. You know, she can remote view different points in space and time. Anyway, Montauk Project and PLG. That's what really happened with the Montauk Project. You won't, of course, see that admitted in the mainstream. They just water it down in the mainstream. But that's what was happening. They were doing experiments in time, not just trying to remote view different points in time, but then, of course, you know, naturally they're going to try sending things through time. So we'll talk about all that in a minute once we discuss the science of time. But first, amazingly enough, the Project Looking Glass device itself with those concentric rings trying to make this electromagnetic shielding. Then you have the water that I mentioned, the water in the device as well, which is very important because water acts as like an electrical superconductor. So it's creating like a viewing portal, a viewing Stargate, right? The PLG device is based around our pineal glands. Frickin' pineal glands. There's so much knowledge about ourselves that is so lost and is so misconstrued in the mainstream world, but our pineal gland is basically like a crystal transducer. I mean, it's a viewing device. Think of it. You've got these piezoelectric crystals in your pineal gland and all this DMT, and say when you're sleeping, it's projecting your astral self into a different realm where literally space and time are different, right? Like that's almost like a Project Looking Glass viewing device, your pineal gland. Every single one of us have these God-given pineal glands, God-given DNA, these God-given abilities to do this, right? Incredibly enough, you just got to train yourself. Got to train yourself, get your mind and your body healthy and grounded and understand these different concepts of mind and actual physics and metaphysics. But anyway, Project Looking Glass device based around our pineal gland with the electricity and the transduciveness and the way the electromagnetic fields work with the piezoelectricity in there, with the water, incredible stuff. Now the experiments, like I said, were being done with time. They were trying to figure out what the heck time really is, because it's nothing like that's promoted in mainstream lore. But the problem they were having with Looking Glass, because these deep state folks, they're arrogant beyond belief, they were believing that time is linear when time is not linear. This arrow of time stuff that's promoted, like I said, in the mainstream science lore, where all their foundations of thinking are just messed up. And the deep state, you know, when they were doing the initial Project Looking Glass experiments in the 70s and 80s, they kept thinking time was linear, so that's why they kept getting problems within Project Looking Glass and Montauk. You know, and this misunderstanding of time is what eventually led them to call it Project Looking Glass, because much like Alice in Wonderland when she was in the Hall of Mirrors, when they were taking different observers to remote view a future, they were assuming that time is a linear measurement when it's not. So they kept getting reflections upon reflections in what they were viewing, with each one just looking a tiny little bit different. Crazy stuff. So that's what led them to call it Project Looking Glass, is because they really didn't understand time. And now let's just get into that science of time. So I'm going to erase this all right here. All right, freeze up some space. So I will name drop the name of one individual, and that's where I get some of these sciences and ideas from. And his name was Dewey B. Larson. I've done some videos on him before. I'll definitely do some videos on his ideas coming up more in depth now that this Project Looking Glass stuff is out there. But Dewey B. Larson did some incredible work into really understanding space and time and their true relationship with each other. So time is not one-dimensional. We perceive it to be in this particular physical realm that we're in. It feels like there's 3 dimensions of space and time is one-dimensional, but it's not. Time is the reciprocal of space. So think of time also having a 3D structure to it. Time being 3D? What? Well, let me draw you a little picture here. So time 3-dimensional. Imagine this dot is right now. Right now, is actually the only thing that truly exists. If you were to freeze the moment of now or take a screenshot of it, that's all that would exist in space and in time. But everything's in motion, both space and time, so we can't freeze frame right now. But what the future is, imagine this. This is the future here, this rectangle square, and this is the past. Okay, past, and then we have future. The past and the future aren't set in stone. Okay, they really don't exist anymore because all that exists is now. The past and the future are abstractions. And this is what they didn't understand doing Project Looking Glass, is that it's not a linear time measurement where the past is set in stone and then the future is set in stone and all this. It's just abstractions. You can think of it as potentials. That's why when I say Project Looking Glass is remote viewing potential timelines, we don't know what the future is going to hold. The future is going to hold whatever we make it to be. It all depends on our choices. There's infinite different ways that it could play out. So with Project Looking Glass, really what they were doing is trying to remote view the potential of future, see what was really going to happen. And of course, the farther and farther you get away from this moment of now, that means the more and more choices, the more and more cause and effects that could happen, and then the sloppier and sloppier that any remote view or an assumption is going to start getting. So that's essentially like time, it's being a 3D structure. It's the reciprocal of space. Just like no two points can exist in space at the exact same time, no two things can exist at the exact same point in time at the exact same time. So this whole time travel thing, it gets really, really messy. The whole remote viewing in time thing, that's simple. They just hook themselves up to a psychic chair, train somebody to be able to use it, and they can try the remote viewing thing. But the whole travel of it gets really tricky because then you're playing with timelines that really, shouldn't be toyed with. You're playing with that tree of life that shouldn't be shook. So the issues that they came up with when it came to Project Looking Glass was, they were, and Montauk, they were doing all sorts of experiments. So with, the Montauk project, people were getting hurt, when they would experiment, try to send people through these experiments. They came back incredibly sick. You hear with the Philadelphia experiment, which was a precursor to all this stuff, Philadelphia experiment back in the 40s, where they put giant electromagnetic charges on a ship and tried to portal the ship somewhere and bring it back. Well, they couldn't really bring it back, and apparently when it did come back, everything was all screwed up, and you had like tools missing or into walls, and people were sick, and just all sorts of stuff. So traversing actual time or that time-space realm is very, very tricky. It's not, a lot of people think, oh, time travel is possible and assume it's like done all the time, but not so much. Although the remote viewing of it, looks like it's currently being done too. This gets us into the last thing to talk about here is what's going on with Project Looking Glass now. So it was said that in the 70s and 80s that Project Looking Glass ran into a problem with this date right here. The 2012 quandary, enigma, problem, anomaly they were having. And that in the 70s in PLG, when they were trying to view anything around 2012 or later, basically this year or later, they couldn't view it. They couldn't even see it. And each observer that they were putting in to try to see 2012, they weren't seeing any sort of reality. Basically, they were just having spiritual experiences. Like they were getting opened to cosmic consciousness, and they weren't seeing any sort of reality. It was just like, it was like a white light they were seeing and having a spiritual experience. Each one was recollecting that. So I think with this particular time frame, with 2012, when we hear of, all of them, the Mayans, the Native Americans, all the ancient scriptures prophesizing these times as there being a change in the fundamental dynamics of our society and even our cosmos here. Like they all knew, based upon whatever, astrology or their own myth in Bibles or whatever, they knew that this date was going to be a change in humanity. And I think it's a literally change in the principles or the functions of our collective consciousness. You could think of this as like us creating our own reality time. So that's why in Project Looking Glass, they couldn't see anything past 2012, because it's basically our Earth moving into that new awakening phase, whatever you want to call it, and it's changing the dynamics of things. So they couldn't view it with remote viewers in Project Looking Glass. But that being said, you know, that was like 40 years ago, 50 years ago that they were doing these sorts of things. I don't doubt now that there's some sort of modern variant where they're able to still remote view potential futures even though it's past 2012. You know, if you take an individual out of it and whatever subconscious biases they might have with their remote viewing practice and start using computer algorithms to gauge these things, you know, maybe that improves the efficiency or allows them to use it past 2012. You know, with Q dropping Project Looking Glass right after discussing artificial intelligence and a global surveillance grid, that's exactly why the deep state was doing Project Looking Glass in the first place. They wanted to know the future so they could control the outcome and try to get this particular, you know, timeline into, or this moment of now, into that future that they wanted. But now we're at a point where it's us create our own reality time. It's not working anymore because we're all beginning to think for ourselves. We're breaking the matrix, basically, and we're breaking their ability to predict the future because we're all beginning to think for ourselves. And it's the reason they data mine us so much. They're trying to predict us. You know, we're beings of pattern, we're beings of habit. So if they can get as much data as they possibly freaking can with Google and Facebook and Amazon on us, put all that together in some giant AI algorithm or some super strong computer and feed that into maybe some Project Looking Glass device and put that on a screen, I think that's what the deep state's really trying to do. Because these technologies don't really work like they used to. And now they're trying to, you know, back when Project Looking Glass was going on, IBM only had, you know, tiny little computers that took up rooms. Now the computational power we have for these sorts of things is much more improved, and of course AI. So, you know, there's basically what I'm saying here is I'm sure there's a lot of modern variants in Project Looking Glass sort of stuff that they're using these days, project names that we have no clue of, and technologies that we, you know, probably barely understand. I'm sure they barely understand them too, but they have them. And Q now looks to be, when they say going forward in order to look back, sounds like they are using some sort of Project Looking Glass variant to predict the moves of their enemies, of the deep state. I mean, absolutely. They have access to it now. You know, if they control whatever the NSA has, whenever black projects are there, totally, absolutely. And when you look at the metaphors that have been given to us by Q since the beginning, such as Alice in Wonderland and Follow the White Rabbit, you're looking at them hinting to us the whole time. And not just that, but hinting to the deep state. Like they were telling the deep state in the beginning, using the deep state's own symbology back against them, you see? Follow the White Rabbit, Alice in Wonderland, Project Looking Glass. They're sending a message right to the deep state with those things. And totally, I mean, using Project Looking Glass, future proves past. They can, you know, use these technologies to see what's going to happen. And also on that note, you know, they can use these sort of technologies to try to view what is going to be the most impactful towards the collective consciousness. So I wouldn't doubt if they're using some sort of algorithms or tech to try to gauge what to post. And the algorithms or the technologies are telling them, okay, post this then, because it can gauge the collective consciousness and sort of see that time-space construct and what's going to be the most impactful. So shoot, maybe Q is having their posts planned with the help of this technology, just for the greatest impact in the collective consciousness in the long run. So there's so many variables to get into with this, and I hardly even touched on the spacecraft navigational component of it. I hinted at that, but you know, taking in the Montauk chair and the navigational component and talking about how to navigate through 3D time and space with one of those faster than light crafts. I mean, this just gets into so many rabbit holes. This is why, this is the weird stuff. And this is the weird stuff that I've been researching now for years, trying to wrap my head around because it's so difficult. There's so much that we need to unlearn, like wash from our brains and then build foundational knowledge back upon that. It's very tough to do. I'm doing my best here to do it. That's what I have for you in regards to Project Looking Glass. And there's so many threads I can take this from here, which I'll definitely do, so we'll see what sort of video I can come up with next. Anyway, hope you enjoyed this, everybody. If you like this content, remember, follow me on social media, subscribe to my newsletter, find ways to support. All that will be in the description below. Thanks for watching. See you again soon. Done.